and then we will start. All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our new forms workshop. Thanks for jumping on with us and diving into the new forms and all that they kind of represent and the things that we have to kind of prepare for and to be paying attention to with these new forms. I want to first also welcome the folks from the Kent office. We do have some folks here from the Kent office. We invited them to jump on as well and participate. I expect and want to open, like I had mentioned a few minutes ago, that throughout this, I want people to ask questions, unmute yourself, jump on. Folks from Kent, you're at home, right? It's all Berkshire Hathaway. If you've got questions, if you've got thoughts, I expect you to do the same. If you've got things you want to ask or perspective to put in there, we want to hear it, right? Really, all that we're trying to do is go through what I think are the key portions of the new forms and determine how it is that we want to function within those changes, right? This is not a forms class. This is not going to cover every portion of the changes of the forms and every new form or anything like that. That's what the MLS class is for. That's what Annie Fitzsimmons's class is for, that you can take for free, no clock hours, but you can jump on that anytime on YouTube and you can get 3 hours of forms from her. In fact, we're even going to watch a little snippet of that class that she did. But this is not what this isn't what that's about. This is, or that's not what this is about. This is really about talking this through and figuring from a boots on the ground perspective, what are we going to do with these changes? I want to remind everybody, I did send last week an invite to happy hour for each of the offices on Wednesday. Burion's at 4, West Seattle's at 5. So by the time I get to West Seattle, I'll probably be a little loose. Those of you that know me know I don't drink much, so I will not. But it'll be a good time to just kind of get together. It's been a little bit, so just a reminder on there. Let's see. Also, what else do we want to cover before I got into the first form? I want to make a recommendation and just identifying that each of us will want to think about how we retool how we talk to our clients as we're going into contracts, right? We've talked a lot in the past about presetting expectations, and there are a lot of new things, new features, new items that you're going to need to talk with your clients about and preset expectations around. So as we're going through this today, just remember, just be thinking, hey, which things do I need to talk to my clients about at what portions, at what part through my transaction? How do I want that to look and go? Also, I want to mention that if you are new or newer to the business and you haven't done a lot of transactions and you're on this call or on this workshop, this is a lot of heavy stuff. So if it's a little bit heavy for you and you're like, I'm lost, I don't understand, that's okay. Stick with it. It really, remember, your managing brokers and I are there with you through your first transactions and through your first couple of years. So you're going to be just fine. Don't get overwhelmed by this stuff. And don't worry about it. Now, remember, too, as we're going through this.
I'll hang in there.
Hang in there. Yeah, absolutely. Remember, too, as we go through this, that we can only control our controllables. We need to focus on what our controllables are, right? We cannot control what the forms say. The MLS does that for us, and that's great, and that's fine. But remember, as we're going through, how can we control this situation? What can we do within there? And remember that where there's change, there's opportunity. And these new changes and these new forms have brought us a lot of positive opportunity. There's some things that we need to know about and be able to work within, but there are a lot of positive changes that are going to really help us in our transactions as we go. So with that, let's see. Key things before we get to the first form that I want to talk about, key things to note. And again, if you've taken a forms class already, you'll already have heard this, but selling broker in all the forms has now been changed to what? Buyer's broker, right? So now the buyer, if you represent the buyer, you're the buyer's broker. Makes perfect sense. Great change. The transactions or the forms are going to hit the MLS on the express forms on the 3rd, which is Wednesday, right? So first thing Wednesday, you should be using these forms. If you have a transaction that is already in process, you do not have to change forms. If you're already in the middle of a negotiation on a Form 35, You don't need to use new forms or swap that out and get it fixed up. The old forms will stay there with you or on the MLS for a little while as we process through the next couple of months and filter all of the transactions that started with old forms out. I don't know if the MLS class, I don't know if the guy had mentioned it in classes other than ours, and I wasn't going to even bring this up, but I'm going to. I've decided it's best to just hit this head on. There was a comment that was made that said that, hey, it actually is, you could use old MLS forms in a transaction. All right. If that was said, if you heard anything like that, I want to say right now that you cannot use old MLS forms at Berkshire Hathaway in order to close a transaction. We use the newest forms always 100% of the time. So please don't feel like, oh, well, I don't really like that form's changed, so I'm going to use an older form. While legally you may be able to close a transaction doing that, it will be thrown back to you through our processing. We're not going to be supporting or utilizing old forms. So just a heads up there. All right, let's get right into it. We're going to start with a hot one right off the bat, a gnarly one to start because you're fresh, right? So let's get it while we're fresh. Let's talk about a 35E, the escalator addendum. Let's get right into it. Okay, I am calling this a hot stove item, and I want to just identify one thing right off the bat. One of the biggest pitfalls that we can have or we can find ourselves in as brokers with the new forms changes has to do with the 35E, the escalator. And specifically what it is that I see being the biggest potential problem here is, and there's a lot of potential problems, actually, a lot of things that will come up. But if you are a listing agent and you utilize or you agree to a transaction that has an escalator addendum and you don't pull it out, right? We've talked a lot about how to pull those out, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But if you take an offer and you don't pull that out, but it engaged the escalator clause, we all know that the rule is that you have to send the full competing offer that caused you to escalate to that new price. And you have to do it without any redactions. A lot of people think that they can cross out the buyer's name on the competing offer or other pertinent information. You cannot. Well, now the form says there's a penalty. There's a lot of penalties that have been put in on these new ones, which is good and bad, but they're just mostly just, you got to pay attention. So now the penalty, remember, is what? If you don't send that competing offer with your signed around mutually accepted deal as a listing agent to the buyer's agent, then the purchase price will go all the way back to the price on the first page of the purchase and sale agreement. Not the list price necessarily, but the price that you have on the first page of the purchase and sale agreement. This means very simply, if you have a $500,000 listing and you're the listing agent and it has escalated to $600,000, and you send the response back to the buyer showing the offer that made the highest one escalate, you're good. But if you send it and if you send over mutual acceptance and you don't send that competing offer, that purchase price, if you started at the list price, will now be $500,000. So your client thought they were getting $600,000, and because you screwed up and didn't send that competing offer, now you have to tell your client, guess what? You only got $500,000 for it. And I don't know about you, but I think it's pretty obvious what's going to happen there, right? Pretty obvious. Debbie, I see you got your hand up.
Yes, I do. So I have typically sent the competing offer in a separate email just because there's, it's big files that you're sending.
Yeah.
Is that going to be a problem if I continue to do that?
Yes and no. Annie Fitzsimmons in her class actually had a good idea, and I think she's right on. I love this. And 99.9% of the time, I think Annie's right on. Her idea was, hey, if you have to send in 2 emails because the file is too big, or it's just you're doing it from your phone or whatever it is, she says that in the subject, and then probably again in the body of the email, say this is email 1 of 2.
Okay.
Right? And make email 1 of 2 the competing offer, not the mutually accepted offer.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I usually send it first, so, okay.
I think that that's the best way to do it. But I think that here is where we have this really big area where, I think we're going to talk about this a little bit today, where there is a lot of opportunity for gotcha real estate. There really is, right? We know that other real estate brokers out there are going to work in this way, where they're going to look for every chance possible to get you. Okay, these forms allow for a lot more of that kind of an opportunity. And I call this a hot stove item because it really is one of those things where, if this happens to you once, it'll never happen again. It's like touching a hot stove, right? You did that once, you're never going to do it again. Well, in this case, we never want to do this once, right? Because this is a huge problem. And if we screw it up, you will be sued, right? So we've got to be really, really intentional about how we are handling this situation. It may also be a reason, if you're representing buyers, to start, at least the majority of the time, your escalator, the first page of the purchase and sale agreement at the list price, right? I have a lot of conflict with this, but if someone on the buy side, if I represent the buyer, I'm sorry, and somebody on the list side screws up, right? Am I going to be holding their feet to the fire? Well, I think I kind of have to now, right? Because I represent the buyer's best interest, right? And is it the buyer's best interest to buy it at 500,000 or 600,000? Now, if we do that, of course, who knows what the real outcome will be and how many people will get involved in how the fighting and arguing and everything else will ensue. But if I'm looking out as a buyer's agent for my buyer, I'm probably going to start most of my offers on the first page of the purchase and sale agreement at the list price. Whereas before, I might have started it at 520 or 530 or 550 on a $500,000 listing. I might now just start it at 500 because if it ever did revert back, it would revert back to that lower asking price number. I see hands. I see Debbie. Is your hand back up again? No. Okay.
That's me, Daryl.
No, I see Debbie's also. So Debbie, if you're able to undo your hand, and then Daryl, go ahead.
So are you saying that we should send the entire escalation or just the front page?
You mean the entire competing offer that made the
Thank
highest
you.
escalation?
Yes, thank you. Right.
Yeah, that has been the MLS rule now for a couple of years or so, or maybe even longer. But yes, now there is an actual consequence to it. So you must send every page of the competing offer without any omissions or redactions.
Even like our notices and that sort of thing, our earnest money receipts and all that stuff, or just actually what is pertinent for the entire addendas of the purchase and sale.
I would be sending every single thing that came in the offer.
Okay.
I would be sending the whole thing. Again, we're talking about tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line here for your seller, right? This is a big, big deal not to screw up. And we're going to see it screwed up in the industry, and it'll be interesting to see how that works. I'm just hoping that it's none of my agents. Daniel, I see your hand up. Daniel. Yeah.
Hello.
Hey.
So if there's so much, not issues, but so much required with an escalator clause, as a buyer's agent, would you still recommend me to do an escalator addenda when creating an offer?
That's a good question, Daniel, and definitely was something we were going to get to here. So I'll go right into that. I think that it is reasonable to say that there are more opportunities afforded to a buyer and safeties provided to a buyer in the new escalator clause than there are to sellers. I think that the new escalator clause is far more a liability for the sellers. Would you agree, Russ? Yeah. Yeah. Russ is shaking his head yes, if you can't see. So, as a buyer, the new form does allow for you to have more time or a specified amount of time to make sure that what you've asked for or what the seller has escalated to is correct, that they've done the math correctly. And there's actually a process then where if they haven't done it properly, then you can then make a response back and tell them, hey, you screwed it up, and then they can argue with you back. So there's really not a lot of reason for a buyer necessarily to want it out. However, we're going to talk about what we think is best practice there and what we should do. But on the buyer's side, maybe not. Now, if we're also making an offer in today's market, in a competitive marketplace, do we really want to send as a buyer to a seller an escalator that says that I've got, as the buyer, I have 3 days as the default to check your math, Mr. and Mrs. Seller? Right? Probably not. We're probably going to be adjusting that and moving that number down, maybe to 1 day. The managing brokers and I, the sales managers and I, we had talked a little bit about this and even thought, well, maybe you even reduce it to a couple of hours, but we decided that's really a bad idea, because if you get mutual acceptance at 3 a.m, right, and you've set it to a couple of hours, then you don't have any opportunity, right, to make those changes or to double check that math and protect your buyer. So, if you're going to leave it in there, you're going to maybe want it to be, a full day or a 12-hour period or something that really allows you the time to actually check the seller's math, which you're going to want to do. Ramon, I see your hands up.
I forgot my question, honestly.
Nuts. Well, maybe it'll come back up. We got more to talk about in this. So, so we talked about.
Okay, sorry, I got it.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, hit me.
So, how much sense does it? Well, our market is crazy, as we know. So, how much sense does it make if? Well, I know we need to do our due diligence for our client first and foremost, right? But if it comes back and it's supposed to escalate to 600, but they didn't send a form over, so I'm like, hey, because I'll say it like, hey, we get this offer now at 500,000. But am I really doing the best interest of my client? Because pretty sure the seller's going to say no, right? Or how's that work?
That's a good question, Ramon, and I was kind of alluding to it before. Is I don't really know how this is going to actually work in the real world, right? Again, we've got folks that do a great job of creating forms and thinking of all of these things that'll help protect us and our buyers and our sellers, and they have their perspectives. But from the boots on the ground side and the practicality of how it's going to actually work, I don't know. We won't know until we start actually doing it, right? And do you engage in that way? And one thing that I would say is before I went back to a seller and said, haha, gotcha, which again, it really isn't even gotcha, because it's not like you did something to cause it. They did something that caused it, right? But, you may want to talk to your buyer and say, hey, here's what's happening right now, right? Within the contract, we have a legal right now to purchase the property for this amount of money, right? This could cause issues and whatever. So we can try it out. We can see what happens, but how it's actually going to play out is probably going to be, it probably will vary quite a bit between different buyers and sellers, and who knows? Debbie, yeah, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I actually did raise it again. Don't you think there's going to be a high likelihood that we'll start seeing more listings that are seller requests highest and best?
Thank you. Yes. See, I don't even have to I have a whole list of so how do we want to handle this with questions to ask, but you guys are hitting them. So this is perfect. Yeah, I do think that there is a lot of reason to potentially for sellers to say, hey, forget this. I just want your highest and best. But now remember, the problem is, why do we not use highest and best now as listing agents, Debbie? Why is it that you don't always just say highest and best anyway? Because we've been wanting to pull the escalator out anyway, because we know it's a terrible form to begin with. Why weren't we always doing highest and best?
Typically, you end up with a higher amount for your seller using the escalator.
Typically, you do end up with a higher amount. I would agree. Yeah.
I do think the market we're in, though, And I've seen it a little bit too. I've started to notice seeing that highest and best. I think there is a general understanding by some sellers where they think that this is just nuts.
Yeah.
And I don't want my house selling like that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we will start seeing a lot more highest and best. I think it's something that you definitely can, bring to your client and see what they want to do. I do think that you more often get more money on it with utilizing an escalator because they feel like they're protecting themselves. I talked about this with the sales managers, and at the end of the day, we actually kind of swayed kind of back and forth on, what should you do if you're a listing agent? Should you try to pull this out? Should you leave this in? And between the managers, all the regional managers as well, and Annie's thoughts and everything else, I really think we still need to pull this form out when possible. Now, we've talked a couple months ago, about situations where if you are sending a competing offer, and let's say the one that won was just, maybe it outbid them by $1,000, but the one that won also had no inspection, no financing, release of earnest money, all this cool stuff. And the other one is like 5% down, financed with an inspection, with their, all these different things, right? That if you are trying to pull out a 35E, an escalator clause, if you cross that off and you send it back, you're countering. You're not accepting the offer, you're making a counter offer. And when you do that, if you send the competing offer, then the buyer has a chance to look at that and go, well, wait a second, I'm paying $1,000 more. That's nothing, but this other offer is garbage compared to mine. I don't want to pay more than this other offer. I should be paying less than this other offer. I'm more secure. And you can have a situation where one party gets away. We had this happen and cost the seller a ton of money, right? And so that's the exception to the rule for sure. But we have to realize and understand that if we're countering back to pull out a 35E, that's exactly what we're doing. We're countering and hoping that the buyer will accept it as it is. Now, if we counter pulling the 35E out, do we have to send a competing offer? No.
No.
We don't. We don't have to. We can counter with anything that we want. Jen, I see your hand. I'll get you in just 1 second. We can counter with anything we want. And if we counter back, then we do not have to send the competing offer. In fact, there's some thought that, hey, just counter back at the highest offer on that one, and if they don't take it, you go to the next one. Every situation is going to be a little different, and your sales managers and myself are here and happy to work with you on each of your situations and the individuality that kind of comes from those. But right now, I think we're working under the rule of thumb that, hey, if we can. That's a terrible saying. I know. I apologize. We want to work within the understanding of, hey, when possible, how possible, let's get that 35E out. But if you represent the seller, you got to really be careful. I want to real quick get to the second way that you can get burned on that. And then, Jennifer, I'm going to answer your question. But not only can you, the listing agent and the seller, get burned if you send mutual acceptance without the escalate or without the offer that escalated your deal that you've accepted. Not only can you get burned there, but as far as I can tell, and what was said in the manager's training session on the new forms, if you send the listing agent send the competing offer and the offer itself, and you have done the math correctly, let's say, but you send it all to the buyer, and the buyer 2 days later comes back to you within their 3-day period and says, no, Mr. Seller, you did the math wrong. I'm giving you notice that the math actually should be this, and here's your new purchase price. Here's what we believe the purchase price to be. The seller has 2 days to reply to that notice. If you don't see that email as a listing agent, if you don't respond to that email in 2 days, guess what you just did? You just agreed to what they said, whether it was right or not. Okay? So that is a second spot where you can really hit some bad choppy waters if you screw that up. It's all about paying attention. It's all about timelines, and more than ever, these changes are really, really focused on computation of time and really the essence, of time and how important that is. Jen Ing, I saw your hand up. I saw you put it down, so maybe you got your question answered. Oh, there you are, Jen. Can't hear you if you are saying something. I see that you popped up on my screen, so it looks like you're trying to engage. All right. We'll wait for Jen, or we'll move on as Jen gets back in if she's got that question. Or Jen, if you want to put it in the comments, you can type it into the comments. I think that is all that I really want to go over on the 35E. Did anybody else have questions, concerns, thoughts that they wanted to bring up about that form? I see Calvin. Go ahead, Calvin.
Is there another form that we use to notify the buyer that they're wrong, or we are not agreeing to your math?
Yeah,
because
that's all on the new form, the 35EN.
Well, yeah, I see that. I'm looking at it. It just says that it doesn't say that they're going to say they're terminating or let's see. It doesn't reply to the buyer though. Really about the wrong math.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me grab it.
Or am I reading that wrong?
Well,
yeah, the buyer cannot.
Oh, go ahead, Russ.
I was going to say the buyer just gives notice. They're not terminating. It gives the seller right to terminate if the price is different.
So
okay.
If you're not looking at the form right now, there it is on the bottom there. And so it gives the seller a chance to go, hey, okay, we're terminating. We can't come to an agreement on what it says. We're out of here. Now, again, having open dialogue is going to be your best friend in these situations, right? Being able to communicate and go back to the agent and say, hey, I've been a long proponent of picking up the phone, right, and talking with the person on the other side of the on the transaction, and not just texting and emailing and that sort, because you can get a lot further by just picking up the phone and being like, hey, we're on the same team. We're all trying to get this done. I see it this way. You see it that way. Let's talk through it. Let's see if we can get kind of on the same page, that sort of thing, right? But it does give you that 35EN, Edward Nancy, 35EN does give you the ability to nix the deal as the listing agent. Good question. Other questions on the 35E?
Tay, in our class that I took this morning, they basically said if the seller sends it, the buyer thinks it's wrong, but it's really not wrong. The seller just says, hey, your math was off, and I'm going to show you how it's off, and then you still move forward.
They can still move forward, but they're going to have something in writing. And that 35 EN, to Calvin's point, it doesn't really have a spot to readjust the math that the buyer did on the first part of that form. Right? There's not actually a mechanism, and this is where, again, we're gonna see some things as we start to use this, in practicality. But it doesn't give a spot. It says buyer provide notice that either the offer used to escalate the purchase price does not qualify as a competing offer under paragraph 2 of Form 35E, or the new purchase price calculated by the seller in paragraph 4 of 35E is incorrect. Okay, that's fine. It's identifying what they're saying above, but then it says seller therefore elects to terminate transaction and earnest money goes back to the buyer. Right, but there's not a spot in there to say no, to argue back. No, you're wrong, and here's what it really is. And now I want you to agree to this. Right. So ultimately, we're going to have to find a way to void that 35 EN, cross it off completely, and initial off on it. Right, between buyer and seller. That's probably going to be the best direct way. If you can agree, buyer and seller both agree that what buyer did is incorrect, then I would just have this eliminated. but you better do it within the 2 days. You better do it within the 2 days, and you might not have total control over that. So you better do it within the 2 days. And if it doesn't get back by the end of the second day, you better use that same form, reprint it out, and terminate the darn thing, right? Because you're going to find yourself in a position where you're going to be in jeopardy of selling that property for a much, much lower price than everybody had really honestly agreed on. Make sense? Whew! Anybody having fun yet? Yeah, I know I am. All right, let's look at the second thing that we're going to look at today. And I know that I had mentioned no clue how long this is going to go, guys and gals. It's recording. I'm going to go here as long as it takes to answer all the questions and get through this. If I'm here till 7 o'clock tonight, my wife will kill me, but I will be here. We're not going to go that long. Don't worry. Form 21, purchase and sale agreement. First thing I want to note on this is that if you are a dual agent, if you are participating as a dual agent where you are going to represent the buyer and the seller. Now, you know, we try not to have people represent both parties. A lot of times you can set it up to only represent one party and still get paid for both parts of the transaction, right? So a lot of times we don't want to be dual agents. But for the times that we have to be dual agents, it was reminded to me that the buyer must sign a buyer agency agreement with you in order for you to actually represent them in a dual agency situation. So if you have ever done dual agency, but you did not have a buyer agency agreement, by law, you did not participate in dual agency. You did not represent the buyer, but you told them that you did. And so that could be a big problem. So make sure that if you are representing both parties, that you have a buyer agency agreement with the buyer. All right. Let's see. Let's talk about the purchase and sale. First thing, I love this. I love the earnest money deposit. Who doesn't love this, right? At the end of the day, that we have taken out all of the ambiguity and the trying to guess and the who got the earnest money and when and what and how, right? We had 2 days to get the earnest money in, and then, but if they got it to the agent on day one, then they had 4 days really to get it to escrow. But if it was day two, it was only day one or zero, or it was all of this mess, right? So now we can negotiate. Donato, I see your hand. We can negotiate the earnest money and how that is to be deposited, how soon that is to be deposited. I like that. I think that that is really, really helpful. Make darn sure that you've got enough time for your client, if you're the buyer, to deposit the earnest money, especially if they're getting funds from another source, right? Don't just say, oh, we're going to have it there in 6 hours. Are you really? Right? We'll have it there in a day. Are you sure it's going to be able to be transferred in a day? If you're doing a wire transfer, are you sure that your client can get off of work and get it done or whatever it is? Donato, what's your question?
So I get the buyer's agency. What if you're representing the buyer, you're trying to procure the property and you're going to the owner? Do they just sign a seller's agreement?
No,
so
see, yeah, that's a good question. No, I'm glad you brought that up. So that is the type of a situation where I'm really going to push for us to only represent the buyer in that case, right? You represent the buyer. You've been representing the buyer. You are going to find them a property. You've found them off market something, right? You don't have to represent the seller as well. You can do the transaction. You can facilitate it without representing the seller in that type of a situation. So that's what I would prefer that you do. And if it was the other way around, or if it was a situation like, hey, I got a mother who wants to sell her house to her daughter. Do you have to represent both sides? No, you could represent one side and leave the other side unrepresented. Of course, you're disclosing that as you go through. Most situations that happen on off-market stuff, like you're talking about, Donato, most of those situations, you should only actually be representing one party, not two. Okay. Most of the stuff where if you list a house and somebody comes to you in an open house and wants to write an offer and now you're a dual agent, usually in those situations, you are going to represent both sides.
Got it.
Cool. All right. Form 21, back to that. The agency disclosure has been cleaned up a little bit. That's nice. FERPTA stuff. If you watch the class on the FERPTA, get a little scared. This is all stuff that we've already kind of had and known and whatever. It's just a good kind of reiteration and time frame for it, that the seller has 10 days to get it to escrow and 3 days to get the notice. And then, or if they don't, then buyer can give notice and then 3 days they can terminate it, right? So if you don't get the FERPTA as a listing agent, best practice would be to get that FERPTA signed up front, put it on the, post it to the MLS, get it into escrow day one. Make sure that everybody's got that and that it's done and out of the way, right? Another thing that I want to mention on the Form 21 is the MLS's version of Chutes and Ladders. They're playing games with us a little bit here. Anybody catch on to that when it comes to timelines and counting days? Counting days is going to be the same way it always was when you count forward. But if you remember hearing counting backwards, they now have rules for counting backwards. And the counting backwards is if you land on a certain day, you actually go forwards. So you count backwards and then go forwards maybe. Just remember, it's not that difficult, and it's actually a really good change. It makes perfect sense if you can track with it, right? If you have to have something done 3 days prior to closing, right? You count 3 days back from closing. If that third day back lands on a holiday or a weekend, you don't go further back. You go back forward. You go back forward, right? You go forward, right? So you would go to the first day that isn't a weekend or a holiday, back in the direction of closing. All right. If you got questions about that, I'm not sure, hit me up anytime. Yep.
Back to the FERPTA, I heard that attorney say in the training I attended that the FERPTA should not be included with the offer, that you shouldn't be including that. Like if you have it available, if the listing agent has uploaded it, I typically just include it with the offer from my buyer at the end.
Yeah, it doesn't need to go, well, okay, what I know to that point is it doesn't have to go on the first page of the purchase and sale agreement in the section that talks about, included forms. It shouldn't go there. Right. But darn sure I'm going to be including it in every offer that I send or have. I want that as part of the package. Why do I want it as part of the package? Because then I have proof that they got it, right? That all parties have it.
You mean as the listing agent?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm saying
as a listing agent, I want it as part of the packet that the buyer and seller are using to negotiate terms and whatever. Again, we know that, if signed, that they are not a non-US resident, that the buyer doesn't have to sign that document. It's a notice to the buyer, right?
Right.
But I want it in there because I want to be able to say, look, here it is. They had it.
Yeah.
Since that is such an easy way for a buyer to get out.
I guess as a buyer agent, if that's been provided, uploaded on the MLS, I've been including it with my offer at the end.
Yeah.
So that escrow then, being optimistic about the offer being accepted, then escrow would have it all.
Yep.
But if I heard him right, he's saying that should not be included.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and disagree with that. I just will, because it should be in with the rest of the purchase and sale agreement. The documents that everybody's agreeing to and is all part of it. I want that as part of that agreement. I want everybody to be able to say it's there. You had it on such and such a day all together. It's how we've done it in the past. There's no reason not to, I guess is what I'm saying. So there may not be a reason that you have to, but there's no reason not to. And I think that protecting yourself as a listing agent is the priority here. As a seller, right? Protecting your seller. That's how I see it. Thank you. Good question. All right. So what do we actually want to do with those changes? Not too dramatic, but how do we want to handle earnest money? Ramon, I'll get your question in just a second. How do we want to handle the earnest money? Do we want to have shorter or longer earnest money times? What do we think is appropriate? What do we think we want to see? Thoughts? I think in a market like today, you're going to have to shorten that up, keep it nice and tight. I think you're going to see a lot of 1 day, right? I think you might see a lot of things that are less than a day. But again, be careful on making it too short because you're going to have to be able to get it responded back to. Ramon, what's your question?
Just going to what Deb said, in our class this morning, he did say it didn't have to be included, but it needed to be turned in. So you had to follow up to make sure that it got to escrow before the transaction was done. And I had an experience with Redfin where they put on a listing, they did not want that form included. So I had to call them and ask them why. And they're like, well, it's not part of the contract. We'll make sure it's turned in, but we don't want you to include it with your initial offer.
Yeah.
So it was a whole thing for me.
I don't have to track it back and forth and make extra calls and everything else if it's part of the packet that goes to escrow. That's all that's my perspective on that. For sure.
And I had a question about the earnest money part. Sometimes it takes a while for escrow to even open up the transaction after we went mutual. If we put a day on there, that's going to be really hard to get it done.
Yeah. So that's a good point. Yeah, absolutely. This is exactly why we're talking about this stuff. So could you find yourself in a situation where you're depositing earnest money or you're required to deposit earnest money before the escrow company even has the contract or the file open? And the answer to that is yeah. So if it's a super short, deposit of earnest money, then I would take the responsibility upon yourself if you're the buyer's agent to get that contact information for title and escrow if you don't, or for the escrow company if you don't have it already. If it's not on the contract, if it is, I'd be calling them right away and saying, hey, where do you want me to send this? Because earnest money is coming right behind it. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a really good point of kind of focusing and thinking about what does our process look like and how do these changes change our process. Other questions on the purchase and sale? Going once. Twice. All right. Let's talk about the form. Oh, no, I see hands. Diana Hinderly. Ramon, go ahead and put your hand down. Diana Hinderly, what's going on?
Well, my question is about the FERPTA again. If it's a responsibility of the listing agent to get that to where it has to go, right?
It is.
They've put it on the listing as a form that we can attach. If we do not, because it's not our responsibility as the buyer's agent, and they don't do their due diligence and get it turned in, what does that do to my buyer?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. First of all, you have then the ability, if they haven't turned it in within 10 days, you have the ability then to give notice and terminate the contract 3 days later, or any time from then to the end of the period. So you don't have to terminate after those 3 days. You can wait and pressure them to still, hey, get it turned in, get it turned in, get it turned in. The thing is that if they are a non-resident owner, if they're not a U.S. citizen, they likely will have to pay taxes. And while I haven't heard of it happening, the lawyer for the MLS said he actually hadn't really heard of it happening, but that's one person in one place of the country. But the buyer could actually be on the hook for the seller's taxes that are due for their status.
Okay, then I'll continue to be helpful.
Yes. So you want to, as a buyer's agent, the onus, the responsibility lies on you as the buyer's agent, even though it's a form that the seller has to fill out. It really is on you, the buyer's agent, to follow up and make sure that you get that. If it's not attached to the listing, if it's not, part of your purchase and sale agreement, it's never part of the purchase and sale agreement, but if it's part of the packet that is going back and forth, if it's not there, as a buyer's agent, your job is to pay attention to that and to get the listing agent to get that done. Okay,
that's what I needed to hear. Thanks.
Good. Yep, absolutely. All right, let's move on to the 22A. It's another gnarly one. Oh, Russ has got a question.
Oh, no. Just want to add, it's very, very important for the buyer's agent to actually get a physical copy of the FERPTA to have in your file. That way, if the seller filled out incorrectly and said they weren't when they really were, and after it closes, IRS comes knocking at your buyer's door saying, hey, we're here to collect these funds. As a buyer's agent, you really want to prove that you did your due diligence and got a copy of that form and have it in your file.
It's a good idea. Yeah.
To protect you as an agent.
Yep. Absolutely agreed. All right. Put your hand down. Diana, put your hand down. All right. Helps me just see who's who's got new hands up. All right, 22A, like I said, it's a gnarly one. Let's talk about it. Let's see, section telling how the seller can request a document with update to the buyer's loan. Okay, so what's going on in the financing addendum, right? In the past, after 10 days, the seller, the listing agent could ask for a sheet to be filled out with information about the buyer's loan. And that's where you would really find out if the buyer changed lenders. Because remember, if they did it in the first 5 days, they don't have to ask, right? They can just do that. That would be your opportunity to kind of get an update on where things are at with the loan. That verbiage, that language is all gone now, right? Now, in fact, what it says is that, hey, here, let me grab my form here. It says in section 1B, like boy, the last two lines says that the buyer authorizes the listing agent or the listing broker and the seller to inquire about the status of buyer's loan approval with the lender at any time prior to closing. So now, built into the contract, the buyer is telling the seller, please call my lender day and night. Maybe not day and night, but as often as you like to check on the status of my loan. All right. This gives the seller an opportunity to kind of be more aware and more aware sooner as to what is going on. Now, remember what I said before, the buyer can change lenders at any time in that initial period without asking for permission unless it's stated in the loan that the loan has to be gotten by a certain company. So if you see a deal and you're like, hey, they are using, such and such a lender, and you want them to use that lender, that's important to you. That was an important reason why you chose their offer over another. If you want to prevent them from now turning around and going to Bank of America and screwing everything up, right? You have to write that into the contract. That's something that you can negotiate into the contract, right? They say that they're using Prosperity. Great. Write it into the contract. Buyer is agreeing to use Prosperity, mortgage for their lender. Great. You absolutely can say that, hey, if that's who you got pre-approved from, that's who we expect you to get your loan from. Debbie.
Where would you write that in?
On a 34 or the space at the end of a 22D.
Okay.
Yep. What else? What else we want to talk about on the there's all kinds of things to talk about the 22A. Let's talk about the options on there, right? So one of the big changes to the 22A is that the buyer and the seller, I guess you're negotiating this, right, can choose to utilize the 22A in a more traditional sense as it's been utilized before, where you have a certain number of days that your financing contingency is good for. But if the seller doesn't enact their right to ask you for, to waive your financing, if you never waive your financing, the financing contingency continues through closing and beyond, right? If the seller doesn't make any action. That's the option A. Now, the thing about option A that I know a lot of you have caught on to is that that time period went from 30 days as the default to 21 days as the default. That caught my attention real quick, real quick, right? Because a normal transaction, right, with a lender is probably around 30 days for financing. But now what that option says, as a default, you can change it to whatever you want. But basically what the MLS is saying, in my opinion, is this is what's normal. This is what's standard, 21 days. This is what people should be utilizing as kind of a level ground or a starting point. That's concerning to me because after 21 days, can things go wrong with your loan? Yeah, they can. It is going to be utilizing that portion. If you lengthen it, if you make it back to 30 days, does that make your offer less desirable in a multiple offer situation? Yeah, probably so. Probably so. Are we going to see a lot of people moving it back? I don't know. But what this means is it is going to be so vitally important. If you are trying to set up a situation where you don't have to waive your financing at all, or to a portion, or until a time that you know you can be safe in it, in releasing that contingency and putting your earnest money in jeopardy, the lender that you're using is going to be so vitally important, right? Remember too that 21 days is really more like 24, because they have 21 days to give notice as the seller, right? They have 21 days to give you notice that, hey, you need to either waive your financing contingency or we can terminate the contract. But then you as the buyer have another 3 days to respond. And if those 3 days happen to end on a weekend or a holiday, you may have some extra days, right? So it's not exactly 21 days, but it is for sure much shorter than your 30 days than what we're used to. Remember too that if you got a notice like this from the seller to terminate, or to waive your financing, or they can have the option after 3 days to terminate the contract. That does mean if you don't waive, you can still close. Everybody can still go to closing, but it also means that the seller can terminate on the morning of closing, and there's nothing you can do about it as a buyer because you didn't waive your financing. You could say, no, I'm not going to waive my financing on day 3, but then on day 5, you could choose to go ahead and waive your financing. That would prevent the seller from terminating the contract. You can waive it at any time, stopping the seller from being able to terminate, but the seller can stop. The seller can terminate at any time. It's going to be a pretty hairy situation for a lot of buyers and a lot of agents to explain if you don't want to be in a position where you're waiving your financing. Now, the second part of that page is the automatic waiver of financing contingency. I think this is going to be really, really helpful in today's market, less so in a different market. But in today's market, it really gives you an opportunity to separate yourself while still having a financing contingency. Maybe you think to yourself, well, I want a financing contingency for 10 days, right? And then after that, my lender has said, hey, on day 5 or day 10 or day 7 or day 11, we'll know for sure, and you're safe to release that. Remember, safe is pretty relative, right? Because crazy things can happen. Somebody can lose a job, can't get the financing. Sorry, you waived your financing contingency, right? But relatively safe at that point. I think we'll probably see a lot of offers, a lot of deals that come through with that automatic waiver of financing contingency option checked. I think we're going to see a lot of that. Questions on a 22A? This one's a little bit heavy, you guys, just from the standpoint of making sure that your lenders are up to date with what's going on and what you need from them. If you have financing, which most of us do on most of our transactions, right? It's going to be vitally important that we are having those and that we are presetting these expectations with our buyers ahead of time. Because the last thing you want to do is have a buyer that has no idea that this is coming. And on day 21, you're like, hey, we just got a notice to terminate if we don't waive our financing. You're going to scare the living bejeebers out of them, right? And it's going to happen because you didn't preset expectations and explain how the contracts work. Okay. Oh, nuts. There was one more thing I wanted to talk about. I'm going to come back to it. Any other questions on the 22A? Oh, here we go. Here's my questions on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to add on the 22A appraisal less than sale price. So they did change the default from will to will not.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Russ, thank you. Okay, so a lot of us will notice and remember that the default before didn't make a whole lot of sense, because usually the default was the thing that protected the buyer more, right? In anything, it was the lower end or the less ramification for the buyer. But this was the opposite. They've changed it now so that it does not waive, not filling it in does not waive your finance or your appraisal portion of the contract. Okay, let's talk about, we're going to stay with the 22A here a little bit, because we're going to talk about the AD, the 22AD, the additional down payment portion. All right. Part one of the new form is the language that we already use. It's what we're already kind of used to utilizing. But part two is the new language to be used if the buyer is waiving financing. So they're waiving their financing, but they're also going to use the 22AA, the appraisal addendum, but want to still offer money towards a low appraisal, right? So before, if we wanted to waive financing, we would just not include a 22A at all. We would use an EF, an evidence of funds, which we no longer have to use because it's built into portion 2 of the 22AD. It's identified there that you're getting a loan. Now, if you're getting money from a gift or something else, then you'd have to use a 22EF, an evidence of funds. But if you're getting the loan, section 2 of the appraisal addendum, number C, no, not number C, letter A, 2A, disclosure of contingent funds. Buyers relying on a loan or loans to purchase the property, but the agreement is not contingent on buyer obtaining the loans. Buyer shall pay X amount or whatever percent of the price down in addition to the loan. So you're identifying there if you're going to get a loan, but you are maintaining your appraisal portion and you want to put money towards a low appraisal. That's in that second section. How many of you have seen the Annie Fitzsimmons video? Annie brings up a very interesting point, and it really drives home the fact that this isn't the first time, and it won't be the last time, that in forms changes that there have been mistakes or things that needed to be changed that just weren't right. And the MLS, well, Annie has already identified this as being something that was completely unintended. She was on the task force that put this stuff together. But in her words, it's too late. The ship has sailed. This is what it is. I'm going to show you the portion of her video. I think that will be the best way to do this. It is complicated, but Annie is going to share with you a way where ultimately your waiver of, or your retention of the appraisal contingency on a 22A can be completely null and void, or can completely null and void a 22AD. Watch and listen and see if you can catch this and how this works. We'll talk more about it, but let me share with you the video. Hold on. I know I brought you back. Hold on. I got to hit the sound button. There we go. All right. Can everybody see the video?
Yes.
I'll take that as a yes. Okay, perfect. All right, here we go. Annie's going to talk about the 22AD and the unintended repercussions.
There are two sections to the revised 22AD. There's a paragraph 1 and there's a paragraph 2. Paragraph 1 is exactly the same as the existing Form 22AD. And it says right on the face of the language that the language in 22AD, paragraph 1, replaces the low appraisal provision of the financing contingency Form 22A. So if you have a Form 22A in the transaction, and if you have a 22AD in the transaction, the 22AD replaces the low appraisal provision of the Form 22A. So if the parties have agreed on Form 22A that even in the event buyer waives their financing contingency, buyer will retain the protection of the low appraisal provision. What buyer is saying is that buyer is retaining now the protection of the additional down payment addendum, because the additional down payment addendum replaces the low appraisal provision from Form 22A. So what does 22AD say? 22AD says, from buyer to seller. Hey, seller, the purchase price is here. And if my appraisal comes in here below the purchase price, I'm going to make up the difference so long as the difference is not greater than X. So purchase price is $450. If the appraisal, and I'm going to bring to closing, I'm going to bring whatever my down payment is that's required. But I'm also telling you, seller, that if the appraisal is low, I'm going to bring an extra $20,000 to closing to make up for a low appraisal, so long as the appraisal isn't lower than $430,000, because we've got a purchase price of $450. So if the appraisal is $430, I'm going to bring that $20,000 difference to make up the difference to the closing, to make up the difference to the purchase price, and we are going to close this transaction. But 22AD goes on to say, if the difference between the appraised value and the purchase price is greater than whatever amount I agree to bring to closing plus my down payment, then I don't have to close the transaction, seller. That's what 22AD says. And in fact, 22AD goes on to say that if the appraisal is here and the purchase price is here and I'm bringing this much and it does not get me to the purchase price, then buyer must, not may, buyer must deliver notice to seller that the appraisal is low and that the difference in the amount that buyer is going to bring to the table isn't enough to make it up. And buyer must give notice to seller. And once seller receives notice, seller can do one of only two things. Seller can either lower the purchase price to the appraised value plus the additional down, or seller can terminate the transaction. That's it. Those are seller's only choices. How can buyer prevent seller from terminating the transaction? The only way buyer can prevent seller from terminating the transaction, based on paragraph 1 of Form 22AD, is to waive the financing contingency. If buyer waives the financing contingency, then seller cannot terminate the purchase and sale agreement because the appraisal plus the difference doesn't meet the purchase price. Because instead, by waiving the financing contingency, what buyer is saying is, don't worry about my 22AD, seller. I'm going to bring whatever the difference is between appraisal and purchase price in addition to my down payment so that the transaction can close. Now, I want you to...
Okay, so hang tight now. Now she's going to get into this. That's the setup, right? That's the situation that we're dealing with. So we needed that few minutes to kind of get ourselves figured on, okay, this is the overall overarching situation where this would come up. The next minute and a half, about 2.5 minutes here, is where things can go wrong, where the issue is with the MLS forms and where you can get yourself hung up.
To pay attention to lines 17 through 19 of the 22AD. In order to accomplish that outcome, where buyer can waive the financing contingency and prevent the seller from terminating, there's language embedded in the boilerplate, and it's housed in lines 17 to 19. And it says, if buyer waives the financing contingency in the financing addendum, buyer shall be obligated to shall be obligated to purchase the property for the purchase price, and seller shall not have the right to terminate the agreement. Fine. That's what the agreement, that's what Form 22AD has always said. But now I want you to think about that language. If buyer waives the financing contingency in the financing addendum, buyer shall be obligated to purchase the property for the purchase price. What if you have a buyer who had a Form 22A in the transaction, marked option B, and their financing contingency automatically waived, even though they retain the protection of the low appraisal provision, if they have a 22AD in the transaction, 22AD says on its boilerplate face, if you waive the financing contingency, you close the transaction, and 22AD has no meaning. This was not the intention of the forms drafters. It is too late to change this form at this point. The ship has sailed. And so what you need to know as a forms user going forward with this form is that if your buyer is going to waive the financing contingency, either because they marked option B or because you're in a marketplace where sellers are delivering that notice to perform and your buyer is going to be faced with either having to waive the financing contingency, even under option A, or terminate the transaction, allow seller to terminate the transaction, then buyer brokers, if your buyer is going to have a financing contingency 22A and likely waive it, you do not want a 22AD in the transaction. You want to live with a low appraisal provision. Because otherwise, if you have a 22AD in the transaction, what it's effectively saying, and I shouldn't even say it that way. You know what? That's not the right way to introduce this. You need to make sure that the buyer understands the risk. If you have a 22AD in the transaction, then that means that when buyer waives their financing contingency, they must close the transaction regardless of the protection built into 22AD, because the low appraisal provision is effectively waived. Maybe buyer still wants to do that because maybe buyer needs to give seller confidence. Look, I'm going to bring extra money to the table if I need to, if the appraisal comes in low. Maybe buyer wants that provision in their purchase and sale agreement, and so maybe they want to include the 22AD. You just have to make sure they understand this risk.
Wow. All right. Do we have questions about that? So, yeah,
I don't have a question. I don't know why it can't be modified once they realize that that was unintentional consequences.
The answer to that is I don't know. What I do know is that other issues that the MLS has had in the past with forms changes, they have changed on the next go round of changes, which usually is like a year. So it's not unprecedented for them to have noticed that something was wrong or not the best it could be, and know that they needed to make a change and put it out in the next grouping. But why they can't make the change now, why that, in her words, the ship has sailed, I don't know I don't know. Sherry Sierra, go ahead. Sherry, I see your hand is up.
Hi, Jay. Sorry, I'll unmute myself.
Yeah.
When you have a buyer and you sell a house for $500,000 and the appraisal comes in at $550,000, originally, if you had the 22AD in there, you're kind of protected up to a limit, whatever limit they put, right?
Yeah.
So if they put, they'll go 20,000 over, whatever, then you're protected up to a certain limit. So what Annie's saying, and I'm sorry, I might be a little bit slow. I'm just trying to understand this. So what she's saying is if you're waiving your financing and if the appraisal came in at 500 and you said you'd pay 550, you need to come up with that 50,000. Yes.
Yeah, you're not slow on this at all. This is weird and complicated. I had to listen to her like 3 times and and everything else. But basically what you have to understand, the way to think about this is that's exactly true. At any point that you waive financing, if you've waived financing before your appraisal contingency or your appraisal has happened and you've gotten through that portion of it, then the 22AD supersedes the purchase and sale, and the 22AD says if you have waived financing, basically that it's irrelevant and that you're.
So there's no negotiating at all. I mean,
there is up until the point that you have waived financing.
Okay. Now,
remember, if you don't waive financing and you can't get your loan, you can terminate based on not being able to get your loan, right? There's ways that you can terminate the contract before you get there. But yeah, if you waive your financing, if at any point your financing waives, and like Annie said, she identified option B, it could work either way, option A or option B. But option B is probably the place where you're going to get burned the easiest, because it just defaults to a certain day that your financing is waiving. Right. And so it's very easy for that to hit that default day, not notice or not have counted it right or whatever, and find yourself outside of your protection that you had originally from the 22 AD towards a low appraisal, and how much money you'd actually bring to a low appraisal.
Okay.
Good question. Tough stuff. Right? Tough stuff. It is what it is. We got to work within what's there. That's the reality. There's always going to be changes to the forms, and sometimes we like them, sometimes we don't. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're unintended, like she says on that one. But that is our reality right now with the 22 AD and how it works with the 22A. Bruce, you've got a question.
Unless I misunderstood what was just said, doesn't when we waive financing, doesn't that waive everything?
It does, unless you've checked the box that says that it does not waive your appraisal contingency, the appraisal portion of the financing contingency.
Well, what if our buyer loses his or her job or something like that right near the end?
Yeah, then they've lost their earnest money.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So that realization that you're having, Bruce, and that others have had or will have shortly, is that's the wow thing about this, is that forget the low appraisal or the 22 AD, forget all that stuff for a minute. That can just straight up happen from utilizing the boilerplate option A with a 21-day opportunity for the seller to give notice, which is what we're actually going to talk about next, right? It can happen at any time. You can lose the financing. The lender could have screwed up and needed something, and the underwriter won't close without this new thing or a new verification. Or your lender, maybe they ask for verification of income up front, in the first week, and they got verification of income, but then the underwriter wants it again. And maybe the employer doesn't get it back and is dragging their feet for whatever reason, or the person in HR that does that is out sick, or I mean, the number of things that could come up are pretty huge. I mean, people have heard me say all the time, what could possibly go wrong? And I always say, I have no idea. I hear new things every week, right, that I've never heard before in 20 years of doing this.
Oh, low appraisal.
Right, low appraisal, absolutely. Now, hopefully the appraisal will be already in, but maybe not. But maybe not, right? How are we going to handle this? How are we going to handle this as sellers? Let's talk about being this on the list side, right? If you took the MLS class, you probably heard something to the effect of they made these changes on the 22A to give the sellers more control, to give the sellers a more even playing field, right? What are we looking at as a seller in this? There's a couple of things that I want to bring your attention to. One is that before, if after 10 days you weren't able to be supplied with this information, you could, as the seller, give notice to terminate with a 3-day notice. But that was after 10 days. Now, you can't do it for 21 days if you use the default. So, but you can talk to that lender at any time. So if you find out on day 10 now that there's a problem with the loan and it's not looking good, it's not going to close, or the buyer's not doing their due diligence or whatever, there is nothing in there to let the seller get out until whatever date is put in, 21 days by default in Section A, if you've used Section A of the 22A, right? So as a seller, you're a little bit more tied in for a longer period of time if things are going south quick. Maybe not so great. But what else does it mean as a seller? If the buyer uses option A as a listing agent and a seller, what should you be doing? on day 21 if that's the default, if the default is being used? What are you going to do? What do we want to do? Do we give notice every single time? On day 21, do we just have it ready? It's a form that's ready to go. Our sellers have signed it. Boom. Day 21, we send it to the buyer and it says, buyer, waive your financing contingency. If not, within 3 days and any time after, we can terminate the agreement. Do we do that? Does it create a hostile environment between a buyer and a seller? Does it matter if it creates a hostile environment between a buyer and a seller? As a listing agent or as a seller, would you not want to give that notice and have the ability to terminate that contract if you wanted? Is there any negative to you as a seller? I've thought this through quite a bit. We talked about it as a management team. We've talked about it with the sales managers. I find it really hard to think of a scenario where you as a listing agent should not be giving the buyer this notice. Feelings and all, this is now part of the process. I think it just is. You're going to be given this notice. I guarantee you that there are many companies that will make it absolute company policy that you must give notice representing the seller, because it's only a good thing for the seller. The buyer can't just back out. The buyer either has to, waive their financing or play a horrible game of chicken with the seller and the lender, hoping that the lender will close and that the seller won't terminate before the end, right? But as a listing agent representing a seller, there's really not a lot of negative other than the goodwill, right? But there's really not a lot of negative to giving that notice. So I would say that the majority of the time, you're probably going to be given that notice on day 21. That is probably your best bet representing the listing agent or the rest representing the seller. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen in these situations, guys and gals? It's going to happen this week. On your next transaction, this is going to be part of what you're doing, of what's happening. What do you want to do with this? Ramon, I know you want to talk.
I said, what I want to do with it, I want to throw all the forms away.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing that we know for sure is that the forms are going to change, and they're going to change again, and they're going to continue to grow, right? The guarantees are this. George Butterfield, you're on here. George, when you sold your first house, how many forms were there? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
It was a handshake.
It was a handshake. Back when George started.
I got in trouble.
Yeah.
And they said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, they're going to meet in escrow next Wednesday.
Yeah.
So, well, what agreement is there? And I said, no, I don't know. I'll be there. I'll see if they show up.
There you go. There you go. There was no paperwork, right? Craig Roberts tells me stories about 1 page, right? 1 page. And now it's like however many dozen pages it is. The guarantees are we're going to continue to add forms and we're going to continue to change the verbiage. And it's going to be based on lawsuits and protecting people and all kinds of different reasons. But that's the guarantee. So if we get in the muck on this, if we get down about it, if we get negative, right, it's not going to help anything. Right? Remember what I said at the beginning, we got to focus on being able to control our controllables. Trust me, when I saw the changes, I had a little cry in the corner of my office. I really did. But the reality is this, it's going to change all the time. And we will find ways to work in this that's healthy, right? We will find grooves. Now, we will always have agents that are going to be, difficult to deal with within any changes or no changes. But this is going to be fine. It's just going to be a learning curve for a minute, right? It's just going to be a learning curve. And that's why we're doing happy hour on Wednesday, right? We can all drink our sorrows away on Wednesday. And yes, Diana, how can I help you? What do you think?
So I'm a little bit confused. If the seller, after the 3 days, after sending notice and they can terminate anytime 3 days after that, does that mean I'm living with my buyer on pins and needles all the way up to closing, that he could be terminating me any moment?
All the way through the day of closing until you have recording numbers. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, is there a reason why a seller might want to close or might want to terminate at that point in time
Yeah, that's a good
that I
question.
would be concerned about?
Yeah, so that's great. I'm glad you're bringing this up, right? Because the majority of the time, why would a seller want to terminate an agreement when they're a handful of days or a week before closing with a buyer that clearly the financing has been going fine? They can check with the lender and everything seems in order, right?
Right.
Why would a seller terminate? Well, realistically, a seller probably wouldn't terminate most of the time. They may terminate in a market like this. I'm going to tell you something. I'm if I can think it up, other people can think it up. There will be some dirty stuff going on. I'll explain it in a minute. But if a buyer had, or if a seller had a backup offer,
Yeah.
right, that was better, well, then maybe they would. Maybe if they had a cash offer $50,000 higher, they might be looking for every opportunity possible to get out from underneath your buyer, right?
Well, then at that point in time, if somebody came along and offered a cash buyer at the, after he's already given that 3-day notice, he could take it then.
Sure.
Ugh.
Yeah. So whether they come, and that actually, if they come along in that time period is where I think people can get dirty. And Ken, I did see your hand. I'll come to you in a minute if you still have that question. But I think that there is an opportunity for buyer's agents who have a buyer that maybe just comes onto the market, didn't see the house when it was active and had multiple offers going on, to reach out to that listing agent if it's been on the market for a few weeks and say, hey, how close are you to being able to give notice? Right? If they're close to being able to give notice, hey, what's your purchase price? What are they giving you for it? Well, they're giving you $550. Great. My guy will give you $580 if you can get out of that deal. Now, is it going to happen a lot? No, it won't happen a lot. But will there be some folks that utilize that as an opportunity to try to find inventory for their client that wasn't available to them so much? Yeah, I bet there will be instances where that is. So yes, your buyers will be, like I said, playing chicken with the seller at that point. I believe that it is something where it is built in animosity and conflict between buyers and sellers that I don't really believe needed to be put there. I'm not a fan of the change, but I can't control it. So here's how we're talking it through to figure out how to best deal with it, how to best handle ourselves in a professional way with buyers and sellers, while utilizing these new forms. Ken, you had a question?
You answered it. Thanks.
I did.
Does the earnest money go back to the buyer if the seller terminates?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I didn't read that. Okay, thanks.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, do we want to put that part to bed? We're getting there, guys.
I have one more question/comment.
Yeah.
So we still can use 34 or another form that maybe I'm not aware of to modify dates prior to getting that close, right?
Give me an example. What you mean?
So let's say you're representing the buyer and you're talking with the lender and you realize, man, we're getting close to that 21 days. How's it looking? Are we going to need a little bit more time? If I were to talk with the listing agent, could I, using a form 34, extend that timeline?
Yeah. I mean, if both parties agree to extend the timeline, right. Sure. I don't know why a seller would agree to extend the timeline. What's the benefit to the seller?
Well,
again, the benefit to the seller is actually to enforce that timeline and give notice whether they intend to do it or not. Now, maybe you give that notice and say, hey, we don't intend to do that. I mean, but I don't even know how you do that, because then that's given a buyer a false sense of security to say, well, we're going to do this. We don't intend to do anything. So feel comfortable. And then when they do, then you do end up, if you do pull out, I don't know.
I'm just thinking about how first-time buyers that are getting financing, how stressed out they're going to be.
Yeah.
This worded.
Yeah. Well, and like I said at the very beginning, this is one of those things where it gives you an opportunity where you are going to need to preset expectations, and really do a great job of explaining it. If you tell them in the beginning, hey, this is kind of messy and this is a weird situation, and because of the market that we're in, we're going to most likely find ourselves in a position where a seller is going to be asking us to waive financing. And this is how we do it. And this is why we use a lender that I recommend, that I know can get it done. And this is why, I will give you a preview tomorrow. Prosperity is going to be talking about how they can lock you in and get you done well before or by day 21. So that if your buyer has to waive their financing, they can do so with confidence that they are going to get that loan. And that is going to be the new gold standard in my estimation for lenders. What can you do to prove to me that I can waive my financing on day 21 and not play chicken with the sellers for the last week? And again, you're not going to do it on day 21. You're going to wait till day 24 because you're going to get that 3 days as the buyer's agent. The buyer's going to have 3 days to respond, right, to that notice. So really, it's going to be 24 if you use the default. Really, it'll be 24 days that you will have your financing contingency intact if you do it correctly. Any other thoughts on that? But you're right, Debbie, yes. First-time home buyers, long-time home buyers, everybody's going to be like, what the what? It's going to be what it is. We're going to work within it. All right. Let's talk about the 35. We've got 2 more main forms to talk about and then some quick hit items here at the end, okay? 35. First of all, I just want to point out things that have already been the case, that a buyer has to have a licensed person inspect the home. You can't have Uncle Jim or Dad do the home inspection unless they're licensed bonded inspector, okay? You also can inspect the home yourself, for yourself. You don't have to hire a home inspector if you personally are going to inspect your own home. But something that I did think was interesting after taking the MLS class and Annie's class was that there was a conflict of information. This is the most direct conflict of information that I ran into in the 2. But Annie says that if you inspect a home yourself, you can ask for additional time periods for additional inspections, right? So if you have left it as the default of 3 days for additional inspections, you can enact that because you inspected the home, and you can just write a recommendation to yourself and send that recommendation to the seller saying, hey, I recommend to myself that I get a contractor out here to look at that plumbing, okay? And you can utilize that if you inspected yourself and did not have a professional inspector come out and do that. However, the attorney for the MLS said the opposite. He says if you personally inspect your house, you do not have the ability to ask for additional time. So, Russ, who's right? You're the answer guy, man.
Hold on, sorry. Having trouble unmute. Who's right? That's where I say talk to the managing broker of your firm. Get his advice. And a lot of times something could come down to an attorney.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, what I would recommend is always having a professional do your inspection, right? And if you do have a homeowner that wants to do their own inspection, great. But just a heads up, hey, if you get into that situation, you may have conflicting opportunities there or ideas there. All right, I just wanted to mention that because it was interesting and it was completely conflicting between the 2 attorneys. Which again, we all, I don't know how often, I get calls from agents and, people want answers to be clean and obvious and clear. And they aren't always clean and obvious and clear. Attorneys fight about things. That's how we have lawsuits, because one attorney says one thing and another says another, and then they fight each other, right? It's reality. Not always clean and clear. All right.
Hey, just to add to that, it's just, if your inspection is 5 days, make sure you get all your inspections done within that 5 days, so you don't have to extend it if your buyer's doing his own.
Yeah, it's a great example of why, too, you want to try to do your inspection sooner in your inspection period than later.
And the other thing, if the buyer does his own and wants to request additional inspections, just let your buyer know the seller might not agree to it because you did the inspection yourself.
Yeah. There you go. I like it. All right, buckle up. We got another hot stove moment here. Remember, hot stove is you touch that stove one time, it's going to burn so bad you're never going to do it again. But you do not want to touch this burner. What's the new change? What's the big deal on the 35 and the 35R and how we handle it? If your buyer uses a 35R, we've known for a while now, right? I think it's been almost 2 years, year and a half, 2 years since the MLS has come out and said, new rule. You buyer and a buyer's agent cannot send any information pertaining to the inspection unless the seller expressly requests it. So if you're asking for money towards items, or even if you're saying, hey, I want the seller to put a new roof on there. Well, clearly there's an issue with the roof, but you can't send the portion of the inspection that says anything to do with the roof in that situation. Now, we've known this for a while, but does it happen? Happens all the time. Our agents mess up and do it. Their agents mess up and do it. Many more times it's their agent. Some of us think it's a bogus rule, so we just do it anyway. I've been told that. I know we have agents that do that. So the MLS said, hey, well, there was no specific penalty. So to give this rule teeth, they basically found the biggest fangs they could, and they attached them to this rule. What's the new rule? You guys watched the class. What's the new rule? Somebody.
If you send any part, you will be.
You're right. If you send any part, you're waiving it. It's done.
That's what it was.
So if your buyer now wants to send a 35R that says, hey, we want a new roof, we want some plumbing done, and we want $3,500 credit for all this other stuff. Right? And they send that. Now, right now, today, with multiple offers and people waiving inspections and everything else, maybe it's not such a thing, right? But if they do, and when the time comes that it is more of a normal market, and they ask for those things, if you send that report, any portion of it pertaining to that stuff, without the seller's permission, you've waived the financing contingency and you're getting none of that. Ramon, you look like you're trying to talk. Are you talking to me or on something else? You're on mute if you're talking to me. No, I think he's talking about something else. All right, so point being, if they ask for a bunch of stuff and you screw it up, who's going to pay for that stuff? Right? Your buyer might have bought it anyway. The seller might have said, nope, go take a hike. We're not doing any of it. And your buyer would have been, nuts. But we're still going to buy it, right? But if you do that and you got to go back to your buyer and say, ooh, I screwed up because I didn't know the rules and I sent more than I should have, or anything at all, right? Anything at all. You're probably going to be putting a new roof, doing that plumbing, and giving them $3,500. Yeah? That's a big bad one.
The buyer will waive their, if as a buyer's agent, you send something.
That's right.
Waived it for your buyer. Yeah.
Yes. Did I say listing agent?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. As the buyer's agent. That's right. Yes.
And the way that the current 35R is, it does say that you can include, and you should include, recommendation from your inspector if you're asking for things. That's the way that the one is for 2 more days is worded.
So we're not doing that. We're not doing that. Now we do have to remember a couple things. First of all, if you're asking for additional time, you do have to include the portion of the inspection that says that where the inspector is saying you need to have an additional inspection, right? You have to have a plumber come in, or you have to have an electrician come and check out this issue, or a foundation person come and look at this issue. If you're asking for the additional period, you have to include the portion of the inspection that refers to that. But if on that same page, it says other things that are negative about the house, you're going to need to block those out, or ask the inspector to send you a page that just has just the item or items where it says that you need to have somebody come back in. And I would really just ask for one because it's irrelevant if it's 1 or 10, right? But that's a situation where you have to send part of it. Now, the MLS did do us a favor. I do really like how it's set up. If you look at the 35R, right, there's, oh, I'm sorry, the 35 itself, right? They have put in here a section on the first page, number 4, letter B, right? Seller consent, seller selection of either box below, seller cannot or is not considered a counteroffer. Okay, so when you're making an offer on the 35B, you don't check, as the buyer's agent, you don't check a box on 4B, but a seller can come back and check a box that says seller requests the buyer provides this inspection report to seller, or that the buyer, if buyer is requesting repairs or modifications to the agreement, seller requests buyer to provide only the portion of the inspection related to those things. So you can say up front, hey, it's okay to send this stuff. It's all right. So now you have the agreement. You have something written there. You have something express written that says you can send that. Okay, cool. Could you, as a buyer's agent, when you write the offer, check one of those boxes for the seller? Yeah, you could. Do you want that to be the case if you're a seller? If they check a box you're okay with, maybe it's fine. But it does mean that there's a new place on this form that you have to be paying attention to as a listing agent, because if the buyer filled in something that you didn't want them to fill in, then you need to take it out. Now, if the buyer left it blank, it says right here that a seller can check that box as they accept the offer, and it does not constitute a counteroffer, right? But I guarantee you will see situations where a buyer's agent will check that box, and you as a buyer's agent might decide to check that box and see what happens. Maybe not in a market like we have today, maybe not with multiple offers, but maybe in a more normal, stable market, maybe that would happen a lot. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how people decide to use that, but it is something that you can do. Now, if no boxes are checked on that 35 during the transaction period, and you get to the inspection and you, the buyer's agent, wants to, the buyer wants to ask for these 3 things, right? And you want to be able to send the report, or if you're the listing agent and you want to see the report, the MLS has provided a new form, a 35C, C like cat, 35C, and that form allows the seller to identify that they would like a portion or all of that inspection report. Now, if you do read this, you'll also see that if anybody checks the first box in section 4B, it says seller requests the buyer provide the inspection report to seller. That doesn't even say that you're going to provide it if you ask for things. That just says that they're requesting a copy of it, right? Remember that you don't have to send the seller a copy of the inspection. That's yours. That's the buyer's. The buyer paid for it. They own it. But if you check that first box, I didn't hear either one of them say, but it says that they're requesting that the buyer provide. To me, that would say that you're agreeing to let the buyer or the seller, to give the seller the full report. I don't know. We'll see how that plays out. But just be aware of that. If that box is checked, they might expect to see the whole box. All right. What do we want to do with that? Thoughts, comments, suggestions?
I think now is a great time to hire a transaction coordinator.
I think TC Solutions does a pretty good job. If you've got others you like, let us know. Don't care who you use, but if you want,
I like that, Debbie.
If you want a TC, there you go. On the 35R in the middle, that's the red copy, but you'll see in the middle of the 35R, there is a spot where they again remind you, don't send documents that you don't have permission to send from the seller. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. There's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars that go between buyer's agents and buyers from buyer's agents screwing up. I guarantee it. This will happen. This will happen to one of our agents in our office. I guarantee 150 of us, somebody's going to make this oops. Do not let it be you, please. And if it is, don't come and ask me for some of the money because I'm not going to give it to you. There's no money to give you, right? I mean, if you screw this up, to make it right with your client, you're most likely going to have to do this because they have an expectation level. The other thing that I want to point out is a new form, the 35W. They moved from the 35, the sections that talk about waiver of inspection and pre-inspection conducted. They moved those items to a 35W, which I think is great. I mean, it's another form, so gosh, do we want another form? But the 35W has kind of a cool spot where they have a third area. They have a waiver of inspection. You can check that. Pre-inspection, you can check that. And you can check section 3 right there, where you can ask for any modifications or repairs. Which means if you did a pre-inspection, but you found out, hey, you want the sewer to be scoped, or you want the sewer to be cleaned out, let's say, well, now you have a spot you can put it. You can check the box that says pre-inspection conducted. That's number 2. And then you can check the box number 3 that says we want these repairs made or these corrections made. Makes sense? So they put it all in one place. I think that's great. So you don't have to use a 34 to write that kind of thing in when you do a pre-inspection. Again, in general, are you going to get items like that agreed to right now in today's market? No, probably not. Probably not so much. Other thoughts about the 35 and 35R? No?
Hey, Tay.
Yeah.
On the 35W, so if the seller conducted a pre-inspection and you went by that, and you're just going to move forward on the 35W, and let's say on the agent, this states seller to fix hot tub prior to closing, or seller to fix faulty stove prior to closing. That's where you'll want to add that onto the 35W to make sure that the seller does complete that.
Yes.
Even though it's only written in the agent remark.
Yeah. No, Russ brings up a great thing there, and that is, yeah, I mean, we see it all the time, not all the time, but we see it plenty of times in the agent remarks where the seller already knows about something that they're in the process of fixing, and they're more than happy to fix it, right? They know that something's happening with X, Y, or Z, and they're working on it. But then there's not really anywhere to put it into the contract. You got to write it in on the 34. So this is a good spot for that. Yeah, Russ, 100%. In fact, you could have a 35 in your contract, an inspection addendum in your contract, and a 35W right off the bat, and utilize that section 3 in the 35W and identify the items that are in the agent-only remarks that the seller's going to fix anyway that they already knew about. Yeah, thank you. Yep, that's another great way to use that form. All right, let's do some real quick hit items on 4 of the forms and then some last thoughts, okay? We're getting there. 22B, contingent sale of another property. They have identified and made very clear that if you waive your 25B, which is your contingent sale, that it is also waiving your financing. So in waiving that contingency, you are waiving your financing at the same time. Good times. There you go. 22B. 22D, your optional clauses. Let's see. On number 9, on the 22D, number 9 has to do with the HOA transfer fee, right? The transfer fee. Some HOAs have a transfer fee, maybe most. On the 9, and in the section 9 on the 22D, you can identify if the buyer or the seller is going to pay that transfer fee. Okay, so now you can identify who's going to pay that transfer fee. However, if the HOA has their own identified party that has to pay that, then that HOA document supersedes the 22D. So just be careful, because if you're a seller and you check the box that says, buyer is going to, pay for the transfer fee, but then you get the HOA documents, the resale cert, and in there it says seller has to pay the transfer fee. The seller's going to pay it. You can't go back and say, oh, but look at the 22D. It's irrelevant. Okay. So just something to note. You might negotiate on that 22D one thing, but it may ultimately turn out to be the other. This is another great example of something you have to explain to your clients. Because if they think that they're not paying it, and then all of a sudden they are, guess who's going to really end up forking over the bill on that? That's going to be you. Because you didn't explain it up front. And now they're frustrated because they didn't think they were paying any more money. And they're already frustrated because they're paying so much money in the transaction that ultimately, to make goodwill, you're going to end up doing that. Diana, I see you have your hand up.
Only because this is not a change. This is what it was worded before. But that I expected that the associations had named the buyers to do some things and the sellers to do some things, only to find out that no, they really don't like to tell you which one's going to do it. They don't care. And that's when my sellers ended up having to pay everything because nothing was ever named. So it ended up biting me several times in the same complex because I just didn't catch it the first time through. But and I asked escrow about it. I said, how come everything is being paid by the seller? And she said, because you mark that box. And I said, but doesn't the association tell us to do? Some buyers have to pay, the move-in fee, which makes sense to me, and the seller has to do the transfer or whatever. And she goes, you would think so, but there's very little of that going on in the associations anymore. They don't care who pays, so they're not going to even say. And so I just thought, oh, okay, warning, I learned the hard way.
Yeah.
But anyway, so this is not new. This is just one of those little hiccups that end up costing my seller more money.
Yeah, it's a clarification of what. So, but that's good to know that what you're saying is hey, some people in the know are saying that it's less often than not that, or than so that the HOA is actually identifying which party is going to pay it. So, but again, that's just it's going to be per building, per HOA, right? So you're just going to see as you go. But it could be a conflict. You could identify it as being one person paying it, and it could ultimately end up being the other. So just a heads up. Lead-based paint. Thank you, Diana. Lead-based paint. They took the leasing portion out of the lead-based paint addendum and put that on a whole new one. So that's great. But the thing about the 22J that I don't think either one of them really talked about, maybe the MLS one did, Annie didn't talk about it. And I just went, oh my gosh, this is actually a big thing that applies to us. And that is what? What changed on the 22J? What was added to the 22J? If you didn't notice it, if you didn't see it. Initials from there's more initials.
Yeah.
Oh, there's more initials. Okay.
And initials for receiving the pamphlets too.
Yeah, well, that's one of the two initials is for, yeah. So there are 2 new spaces on the 22J that your buyers need to initial. All right, you got to pay attention to it. And it's not the bottom of the page, it's at the top of the page because they really want to mess with you a little bit, right? So pay attention to that because what's going to happen a lot, especially as we're learning these forms, is that you're going to get messages from our good friend Hillary, who really protects us all as she goes through and checks your forms to make sure that you've got everything and that all the initials are in there and everything else. She is amazing. I don't know how she does her job day in, day out, but she does a phenomenal job. But you will be getting more nasties. She says it nice, but from Hillary saying, hey, you missed initials here. You missed initials here. Right. So pay attention to that. There's a spot to initial. And then lastly on that, the 22T, the title identifies that if preliminary title is provided before mutual acceptance, how would that be? If preliminary title was attached to the listing, right? Or if it was sent upon request before a contract was mutually accepted. If preliminary title was provided before mutual acceptance, then the review timeline starts on mutual acceptance, not on the day it was provided. All right. So it's just clearing up and identifying when that period starts. I think that's actually pretty important and nice to have in there. So good work there. Maura, I see your hand. How can I help?
Really quick, back to the 22J. The first buyer initial on page 2 says buyer has received copies of all information listed above. Well, if the seller has no knowledge, has no documentation, then does the buyer still have to initial it?
Yeah, yeah. You're just saying you've received all of the information that they had none of. So you've received all of nothing.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Good question. Not worded the best. All right. A few little extras here. MLS class. Oh gosh. You know what? We're going to talk about this stuff another time. I'll talk about that in a sales meeting, an upcoming sales meeting. Those two. All right. So with that, I just want to identify a couple things, right? What we just went through, is that all of it? Is that all of the changes to the forms? Is that all of the things that you need to know? No, it's not. Is it most of it? Okay, yeah. I'll say it's probably most of the things that you need to know, right? But it's not all you need to know, and this isn't the only thing that you need to be doing. If you have not taken the MLS class or any Fitzsimmons class, go take Annie's. You can watch it online at any time at your convenience. It's 2 hours and 40 minutes, and I know that sounds like really what you want to do, right? Everybody wants to, that just spent 2 hours doing this, wants to go spend another 2 hours and 40 minutes doing that. But even if you saw the MLS class, I recommend checking Annie's out. Remember, these changes are so dangerous, some of them, if you do them wrong, if you're not paying attention, if you make a mistake, there is big, serious ramifications. And so I can't understate it enough. It's your job to know and understand the forms. I'm here to support you and to help you in that. And we're going to learn together as we go through what this is and how this works best. Maura, I see you've got another question. Hit me.
One more really quick. The attorney this morning in the class was talking about licensing agreements with photographers and that we should be using a 13A or a 13B or a 13C because most photographers only give us a license for the purposes of the listing and not beyond the listing. Are we going to talk about that at some point in time?
No. It's not on my docket of things to talk about. No. If you want to use it is up to you to figure out what your photos can and can't be used for, right?
Okay.
That's between you and your photographers. Connect with them, ask them, get things in writing that say what you can and can't do. This isn't new, right? We've known for a long time that photographers, some of them do not give you full rights to have and use those photos for anything and everything forever and ever. But it is a good reminder. Thank you, Maura. Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else from anybody else? Any last questions, thoughts, queries, comments? Going once. Going twice. I hope this has been helpful. And as you go through using the new forms, don't be bashful to call Russ. I'm kidding.
Thanks for setting this up.
You're going to reach out to any one of us. Sean, I saw your hand pop up there real quick. Did you have a quick question? Or a long question?
Yeah, when you talk about ramifications from your buyers, you're talking about them suing us, right? I mean, there's in the contract that says we're going to pay for a roof because this mistake happened.
Yeah, I mean, well, you just think about it for a second in terms of what happens if a buyer has the expectation that you're asking the seller to do something, and then you have to go to them and tell them that, no, you're not going to get that. And the reason you're not going to get it is because I screwed up and sent a portion of the inspection contingency.
Right.
What do you think is the most likely outcome there? Maybe your buyer says, Sean, you're the best, man. No big deal. Oops.
Right.
You know, you're human. No big deal. Okay, that could happen for sure. Is it more likely that they're going to be like, what the heck, man? And then do you want that person happy or mad? Is that person worth referrals and business in the future? Do you want to do them right? Or do you want to, be like, well, I totally screwed up because I didn't know my forms, which is something that's pretty big that I should have known, and I'm not going to do it. Then I don't see a situation where you're going to just say, well, I'm not doing anything.
Right. And then my other question was, as a listing agent, you think people are going to be requesting over the phone, yeah, send me over the inspection report without getting written consent to somebody who doesn't understand the forms?
Well, I think that will happen. I think. Oh, are you saying like to try to create a gotcha situation?
Yep.
Oh. Well, if you thought it up, I bet you somebody will do it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good, perspective. And I think that we'll find other things like this as we go through this. There will be other opportunities or pitfalls that will come of this. And you cannot send it without something in writing saying to send it. And we do sometimes get a little chummy with the agent on the other side for good reason, right? Because having a good relationship with the person on the other side is important. But yeah, could you get yourself in a situation where the agent on the other side says, yeah, no, it's okay. We definitely want to see it. And you're just, everybody's in a rush and they don't want to get something signed. And it's such a hassle. Do you remember when we actually used to get wet signatures on everything? And now people think things are a hassle to get signed. Let me tell you, it's not a hassle anymore. It's insanely easy. But right, if we want to cut corners, we want to do things quick. Yeah, could you find yourself in that situation? 100%. Yeah.
So as a listing agent, should we be doing that?
No, please don't. No. I am a huge, if I feel like we've got folks that are doing things to intentionally create gotcha situations, I would have a big problem with that. We would probably have to move on because I think that our ethics would be no longer in line at that point, right? Now, that doesn't mean that if a buyer's agent screws up and sends the whole thing, it doesn't mean that you don't turn around and say, well, guess what? Now you're buying it without getting anything on the inspection.
Right.
That's what the contract says. But if we're doing things to promote that happening, if we're doing things to kind of slant into a situation where we could take advantage, then yeah, I think we wouldn't align right with our ethics and what we're really trying to accomplish. I think that the MLS has done some really good things here. I think that they've had really good intent on some other things that maybe I feel might be a little bit difficult or maybe even miss the mark a little. But I do think that this is going to have an opportunity to have more conflict between buyers and sellers. And I think we got to know and understand that and be ready for that right now, off the bat. We need to be pre-set and ready and paying attention for that. My biggest concern isn't even that. My biggest concern really has to do with the escalators. If you were to say, what's the thing that's the biggest problem? That on the inspection is a big problem. The 22A is a big problem. But I think that the bigger problem is an opportunity to lose $100,000 on a deal because you didn't send a competing offer. That to me is where you can really end up in a bad spot. Good questions. Any others?
Okay.
Going once, going twice. I'm going to stop the recording, but I will stay on if anybody else wants to chat a little bit. Thank you everybody for jumping on. I know that's a long 2 hours. I know it because I can feel it in my voice, but I look forward to seeing you all at the sales meeting tomorrow where we will not cover anything about new forms. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tay. Very helpful.